A Spanish proverb says, "Tell me to what you pay attention. Tell me to what you pay attention, and I'll tell you who you are." In the current cable television and internet discourse, the quintessential attention grabber is likely to be loud, aggressive, the audience's attention span brief, the analysis mediocre, and the resultant caricatures of people and events superficial and cliche-ridden. Very optimistic. Could be, as the proverb pointed out, that loud, brief, mediocre, and superficial is who we consistently are as a culture. But paradoxically, who we typically are may best be explicated by the juxtaposition with one who we typically are not. Zvi Hecker only happens once. If we bring the conventional analytical criteria to the production of Zvi Hecker, we'll confuse his unique content and mistake its value. The architecture of Zvi Hecker belongs to an individual, not to a genre. It's architecture, one architect at a time, to which we have given insufficient attention. The Zvi Manifesto is solitary. No constructivists, deconstructivists, or digitalists are all in it together this time. Once in a while, architecture is personal. Recall a biblical preacher once told us, "The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun." Perhaps, surprisingly, the preacher and Hecker speak with similar pessimistic voices. But the auditory side is where the parallel ends. Zvi Hecker's existential pronouncements are confounded by his architecture. So in Zvi's case, the preacher's case will have to make an exception. The eye is indeed satisfied with seeing, the ear indeed filled with hearing, and the architect's architecture is indeed a new thing under the sun. Hanging in the Prado is Goya's ghastly portrait of Saturn devouring his children. Human affairs as an enduring, human affairs as an enduring horror story. Maybe so. A message in paint not unlike the biblical preachers, and similar to a number of Zvi Hecker's personal pronouncements on the collective prospect for the human race. But then, strangely, there's the painting itself. The potency of one of the world's most poignant representations of horror is the essential experience. Saturn's eternal munching is glued to our collective brain. And here's where it gets complicated. In a sense, if Goya followed his own intellectual message literally, he would never have painted Saturn's banquet. Because if human affairs are a nihilistic terror and there's no new thing under the sun, why paint? Fantastically, the wonder of the art transcends the pessimism of the message. The art-intellect dialectic metamorphosizes as a lyrical affirmation. Goya dances over his own nihilism. Zvi is a dancer too. That which is done is that which shall be undone. Please welcome the preacher, Zvi Hecker, producer of New Things Under the Sun.
I wish the lecture will be finished with what Eric have said, because I couldn't say anything better than he. So, but I will try something at least. This lecture, the title is "The Soil of Architecture is Memory." I will try to show you not the latest work of mine, because I think if they are not good, so it will be absolutely waste of time, yours and mine. If they are of any good, these glossy photos will anyhow find their way to glossy magazines and you will see them. So I will try to speak about what you cannot see in the images. What is behind, what is the thinking behind the images? And there is, of course, a question whether there is some kind of knowledge that I can pass to you students, and if yes, how can it be done? Because we all go through our own experience, but we also live by example of others. So there is this contradiction. Anyhow, the lecture is not arranged chronologically, but according to some kind of progress of development of an idea which influence another idea. Because we cannot live, a building never can live on one idea. My friend Moshe Gershuni, a very fantastic, a very great artist, Israeli artist, once told me, when I complained about being stuck with a project that was the Jewish school in Berlin, he said, if an idea cannot bring another idea, it is a sterile idea. So I will try to show how to overcome this sterility by staying only by one idea. So let's start. That's a small city near Tel Aviv. I was asked to design housing, apartments and a commercial center. That's already the final project, but I want to show you the development of this project. Next. That's how I started, 2 streets, and the lower part is the commercial center. Next. Next. Then there was an exhibition of walls of Ferrara in Tel Aviv, and I thought that maybe I should copy the Citadel of Ferrara. Maybe it will help me. So next. You see the Citadel of Ferrara is in my project. Then ex-assistant of mine, Shmulik Grogerman, came to visit me, and I was asking him what he thinks about the project, what should be done. And he said, well, this Citadel should influence the project. So I accepted his idea. Next. And you see that something is going on now. The Citadel started to influence the back of the project, which is the apartments, housing, whatever. Next. And here I see I have come in the morning, one morning, and continued this project, and then I found out that something is going on which was not intended. Next. 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 And you see that a sunflower geometry is suddenly very clearly already in the project. Next. 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 And that's, the project was in the office for about 3-4 years. Meantime, I have been involved in other projects, but this I work continuously. And you can see that this means of drawing, there are kind of way of trying to understand what I am really doing. Because the artist really never knows what he is doing. But the moment he knows, he again starts to, continues to do something, and again he is in the darkness. Next. 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 So all these drawings are development of the idea. Next. Next. I would say that the drawings show to the fact that whoever does them, and in this case it's me, doesn't know what he is doing. Because if I would know what I am doing, I would not need to do these drawings. So that's a kind of paradox, but that's very true for every art, and architecture sometimes is as well art. Next. 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 And when we arrive already at some clear understanding of how to build this project, the municipality of Ramat HaSharon wrote me a letter that they are not interested anymore in my work. So that was the end of the 3-4 years. But the question is whether that was a waste of time, whether investing all this work in this project, whether it was something which I should regret. But I think not. Next. Yeah, that was the final model. Next. Next. And here is another building which, well, I should say that I am speaking about very old projects, because the one that I show you, it's the beginning of the 80s, so it's some 30 years. And the project on the bottom, A, is Dubiner House, which with Alfred Neumann and Eldar Sharon, we have built in 60s. And C is a spiral building, which I started in the middle of the 80s. Next. That's how it looks from above. Next. But in the 60s, we were experimenting with Neumann of high-rise building in the form of spiral, but on a central column. Next. But here I try to arrange the spiral building around a courtyard, because it seems to me that courtyard is the most important part of every building. And that was not so easy. Next. There were some drawings made. Next. Next. And finally, we found geometry and construction, which can be practically built. Next. So the apartment is rather, there are 8 apartments on 8 floors, one on every floor. Next. And that's the last apartment, which moves. Next. That's how it looks from one direction. So you can say that this building is like a spiral staircase, where every step is an apartment. In the Dubiner house, which I haven't shown you, the floors are shifting, and that's how we achieve the open terraces. Here, the site was very small, so it became rotational, rather vertical, in vertical form, but still achieving open terraces. Next. Next. So I think if you see this building, probably what I have been doing in the project of Ramat Sharon, which I showed you earlier, some influence of that project is already here. So I think it was not totally waste time. Next. Next. But what I also found, that you cannot really transport one idea from one project directly into another project. What we are really doing as artists, as architects, we are trying to reach a destination, but an unknown destination. An unknown destination is not indicated on any maps, so there is no public transport to this unknown destination. So what I am showing is a means of transport to reach this unknown destination, which otherwise I wouldn't know how to do it. But I think you have to build this transport, the means of transport for every project. So you have already a kind of experience building another one before, but it doesn't mean that this vehicle will bring you again to this unknown destination. Because an artist never knows where he is heading. I don't know if you ever heard, but the great painter, Auguste Renoir, before starting to paint, he used to kiss the canvas. It means he also never knew what will be the outcome of his painting. Next. 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 And you see that it was already a very advanced stage when I knew how to achieve this courtyard, but still these drawings are quite only selection of drawings I am showing you, but there are hundreds of them. Next. 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 Next, next, next. Fortunately, because I'm living in, when I'm in Israel, in Dubiner house, which is opposite the spiral house, I could work on the scaffolding myself, and the construction was very much in my hands. So these drawings are already kind of working drawings, which only I could understand and direct the construction. Next. Next. Yeah, those are really working drawings. Next. Next. And Piranesi copied my drawings, as you see. I was before. Next. But there is something between, in this large volume and small volumes underneath this, like in Piranesi prisons. Next. That's the view of the courtyard. Next. And the view of the terraces. Next. 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 I also introduce myself some pieces of mirrors which I collected, and I had to do it myself. Next. Next. But there are already snakes in my drawings, and also if you see maybe you can show the slide before, the image before, you can see that my appetite for the mirrors was ever greater. In the last floor, I already make some forms out of it. Before, it was only a kind of surface. Next. 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 And next. Yeah. Next. That's another project which continues this experience. And this is already beginning of the 90s when I won a competition for the first Jewish school in Berlin. Marcy was working with me on this school. There is a beautiful model that now in the Berlinische Gallery that you have made, among other things that you have done. Next. And that's the scheme of this school. Next. You can see that the courtyard is ever present. Next. And that's the view from above. So the school started as a sunflower because I thought what could be, I won this competition being in Israel, and I thought what could be the gift that I can bring from Israel to the Jewish community in Berlin, and it was a flower, sunflower, and of course sunflower is based on logarithmic spirals, so I had some experience. Next. Yeah, you see the geometry. Next. Next. But next. Yeah. So you see again this endless attempt to understand what should be done. Because basically there are two ways of, I think, of doing art or doing architecture. One is that you are leading the work. And the other one, which is probably better, is that the art is leading you. So in what I am showing you is I think the combination. Sometimes I am leading the work, and sometimes the work is leading me. Because an idea is no more like a newborn baby. It still needs to be taken care, and it cannot communicate. And so there is only a monologue. We are directing the work, we are speaking to the baby, but the moment the baby starts to speak to us, that becomes the dialogue, and that one can say the work is leading and not the architect. Next. 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 And that's the snake. That was the moment when I complained to Moshe Gershuni about being stuck, and then I introduced the snake as a corridor, and something started again to work in this design. Next. Next. And the process was, what was good in this process, that I could work and continue to work while the construction was already started. So there was like kind of development of the idea even during the construction. Next. 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 And you see the entrance. So during the construction, many people who visited, friends who visited the construction, they comment sometimes that the school looks like a small city. And then probably I was not surprised so much, because the school, if you have seen the drawings, the school has courtyards, cul-de-sacs, some streets, even this piazza. So it's like a small city. Next. And children are always protected in kind of courtyards before they can go to the open space. Next. And it is really not one building, but kind of landscape or small city. Next. Next. That's one of the courtyards. Next. 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 And that's the other construction. And when I have seen this photograph, I thought that we should make a model next of how the walls and construction and beams and really the columns stand in this project, in this school. And what we found out, that the project looks not exactly like a sunflower, not like a small city, but it looks like pages of an open book. And this, if I would be clever, I should start the design of this Jewish school as pages of an open book, because in Hebrew, school is Bet Sefer. In direct translation, it means house of the book. So if I would think about it, I could start the design taking as a metaphor pages of an open book. But then I am sure I will finish with sunflower. Next. And that's Paul Klee. And I found this photograph, this drawing only 2 weeks ago when looking at the old catalog of Paul Klee. And there is nothing more pleasant as to find this kind of affirmation that somebody else has done it much earlier, but somebody of the quality of Paul Klee. It was, I think, 1928. Next. And that's the last project in this series of development. Next. It's a Jewish cultural center in Duisburg, Germany. It's 1995, and it's also a result of a competition. And here we adapted as if the pages of an open book, but this time they also introduced the light into the interior of the building. Next. Next. That's the plan, small synagogue, of course, courtyard, and assembly room, kitchen, and a normal administrative and educational program of Jewish community. Next. And you see the light coming from these pages of the book, which maybe as a metaphor is right, because book illuminate our mind. Next. That's the small synagogue, and there is also light coming from above. Next. That's the illumination. Next. 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 But on the other hand, you can say that this building is also a kind of very typical classical building, where, like a Greek temple, where the columns around the small temple were much bigger than the temple itself. So this extension of the building into the park, it's a kind of generosity to let people cross the building, even if the building itself is closed and you cannot enter it. But still, it's not an object in the park. Because in the competition, it was possible to move the place of this building in another direction. It was free for us to decide where, but we decided to continue the urbanism of the street and to open into the park, but not to make a pavilion. Next. Next. The black and white is the synagogue. Next. Some drawings. Next. And you see that from one side, the building has the scale of the vernacular architecture to which it is adjusted. And on the others, when facing the park, the scale is changing. So there is a kind of change of scale within one building. Next. 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 But this idea of palm of a hand, or pages of the book, but really palm of a hand, was already many years before, in 70s. Next. I have designed a housing project that's under construction near Jerusalem, where the buildings were five fingers, each one composed of 5 buildings, and they create an interior street, a kind of row of courtyards that you can cross without going outside. You can go through the buildings, in between the buildings. Next. And that's another project. That's a museum of Palmach, in Tel Aviv, and trees growing on site. Next. And here, I would say that's an example, another example, that this idea of transport to an unknown destination is not exactly right for this project. Here we have found that actually we are standing on this destination. The destination is where we are. Next. The building was built around the trees. The outside form is exactly the borders as given to us by the site. The slope is the slope of the street and slope of the terrain. We continue it into the building. Next. To save the trees, it was not so simple, and the client was quite unhappy because he wanted to have new trees and much cheaper, but we convinced him that Palmach, which was an underground organization which fought the British for the independence of Israel, had this agenda that Jews are coming back to the soil, to where they have been 2,000 years ago. So how not to respect the soil and the trees? Next. We not only continued the slope of the street as slope of the terrain, but also used the stone which we excavated while digging for the basement. So even the stone, the material comes from the site. So one can say that here, that's an example, an example which happens very seldom. It's exceptions to the rule, I would say, that you don't work to find your destination. But this exception happens very seldom. I remember once I heard Laurence Olivier, the British actor, saying that he was 200 times Richard III, playing the Richard III. But he was only twice Richard III. And that's maybe the proportion between the work that you are leading and the work that leads you. Next. Next. The stone is very fragile. It's not really a stone. It needs around 2 million years. That's what I heard from geologists, to be really stone. But the client didn't want it to wait so much, so we use it as it is. But you cannot see, but there is also a plaster which is mortar, which is simulating the stone. So that we experimented very much with this stone. Next. Next. Those experiments were unsuccessful because the stone fall down from the plaster. At the beginning, I thought that the stone will be put into the fresh plaster, but it fall down. You see that only some of it remained, but we left the experiments. Next. 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 Next, that's the courtyard. Next. So the soul of this building is really the courtyard and the trees which we saved. Next. 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 We are not only limited by the site, by the slope of the terrain, but also by the limited conditions. There was really no budget for this building. Every time, again and again, the work has to be stopped because those people who once were in Palmach, they collected money from other members of that organization. And then when they collected a little bit more money, we continued. So it was quite fortunate for us because we could still continue to design. And of course, the work is not what the German architects would like to have. It's a very rough concrete. And I let the people to have the freedom how to make this concrete, not to over-design the scaffolding, this kind of forms, but to have something which is not real design. Next. Next, interior, next. And how the building becomes a part of the landscape around. Next. And that's the last project which I would like to show, which is an example even more radical of what an architect sometimes can do. Because in this project we have done simply nothing. It's a memorial for a destroyed synagogue in Kristallnacht in 1938 in Berlin, when the Nazi destroyed many synagogues. And after the war, or in the 90s, there was also a competition for a memorial, because on the site of the ex-synagogue, next, that's the interior, on the site of the synagogue was built a new building, but in such a way that the courtyard of the new building is where was once the great hall of the synagogue. You can see the benches in the synagogue. Next. And you see the interior, the plan of the synagogue, and now the benches that we recreated or created in the courtyard. Next. Now standing among the trees and grass, next, which grew over the ruins of the synagogue. We have really done minimum, nothing that we brought. Everything is part of what it was. Next. Next. And if you look from above, from the window of the new building, you can imagine that you see a text, a page of a text, written by the benches, a text of history probably, a text of Jewish history in Berlin. Thank you.